Hi, I'm Justin Barrett, president of Blueprint 1543.
And I'm Ana Ávila. Welcome to this Integrated Life, a podcast for those who seek to engage with life's biggest questions using the tools of the sciences with theology. Welcome, Justin. Do you want to pretend that we haven't been talking for the last 20 minutes? How are you?
Yes, let's pretend. Good morning. It's so great to see you.
Great to see you too. Today is our last episode of the year. Sad tear. Actually, no, that's good. We need some rest and recharge to think about new things to talk, hopefully in the new years. And actually, we're going to talk about resolutions. But before that, I want to show you something.
Uh-oh. Do I need my
I want to
glasses?
show you something. Maybe, maybe.
Okay.
This is something someone in the Blueprint team found very randomly on the internet, and they were like, "You need to show this to Justin and film his reaction." It's very random, but here you go.
Okay.
Let's
All right.
see.
Let's see.
I hope you can listen. Okay, let's see.
Justin Barrett has this in his cognitive psychological or cognitive science literature. I'm not sure if you've come across his stuff, but basically what he says is that we have an innate, his words exactly, receptivity to believing in God. In 2011, the Oxford Anthropological Society, they done a huge study of 32,000 children, and what they found was that children innately and intuitively, instinctively have a belief of a higher power of some sorts. Now, they are born with that belief. And in fact, in one of the papers in Justin Barrett's book, he literally mentions the fitra, or the Islamic theological concept of an instinct in believing in God.
What's his last name?
Barrett. Justin Barrett has this in his...
Come on, Jordan. What do you mean, what's his name? Come on, Jordan.
He jotted it down and probably looked at your papers later. So there you go. Jordan Peterson knows you exist. That's what we wanted to show
you. And I appreciate, it looked like his name was Muhammad
yes.
From the notes. I appreciate that he did a reasonable gloss on the thesis. I mean, I don't use terms like innate, but
that's what I was going to ask you. Did he represent the conclusions of your research well? What would you say differently?
The basic idea is, I think there is strong evidence that children, by virtue of just sort of ordinary human development, do develop with a propensity, a receptivity. He's right about that. I did use that word, a natural receptivity to believing in at least one God, just by the way that our minds work. It doesn't mean they've sort of come out of their moms with a theological concept of the creator God or anything like that, but they seem to very early in life develop a whole bunch of little ways of thinking. Almost think of them as sort of slots, or I sometimes use the metaphor of a shape sorter, that little toy that you put different shapes in, like preschool toy, that they develop with a little God-shaped slot that then they're waiting for cultural input to know what gets put in that slot. Is it going to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or is it going to be something else? But there's that slot does seem to be there as a natural part of just being a human being in ordinary environments.
Could you talk about the experiment design or the research methods? Like, how do you get to that conclusion?
Well, you don't do that in just one study. You do that in a whole bunch of studies in a bunch of labs, and you sort of draw the conclusion across all of the studies. So some of the studies are, because what you can't do, which is the gold standard of science, which is random, a randomized trial, where experimental design, where you stick one group of babies on an island, over here, and you try to see what kinds of concepts they develop, and then you've got your control condition. And no, you can't
Probably
do that.
Not ethical, though.
Not ethical, and just pragmatically difficult too. But what you can do is look at things like what kinds of ideas do children learn really quickly, seemingly across cultures? What ideas do they where their mistakes, so-called mistakes in thinking, go? Do they tend to go in a particular direction? Because usually we make mistakes in the direction of what's easiest for us and most natural in our thinking. So you can look at things like how do children reason about the natural world? And Deb Kellerman, in her work, she's a developmental psychologist at Boston University, has just done tons of studies, she and her collaborators, showing that young children, preschool age children, expect to see, well, they think of the world in terms of having design and purpose, for instance.
Yes.
Animals are here for a reason, and that's why they're here. It's not just that I see stuff and I see design and purpose. It's that, and I think that design and purpose is why that mountain is here, why that river is here, why that tiger is, why the first ever tiger was here. So that seems to be in the background. So that already inclines them, makes them really receptive to the idea of purpose and design. She, in some of her later, more recent studies, has shown that then nudges toward, and someone is responsible for that design, that purpose, that direction in the natural world. So there seems to be a natural receptivity to the idea that a god or gods have been involved in giving us purpose naturally and purposing the natural world out there. The studies that I've done have mostly had to do with how children reason about God's properties. And we've shown that children find it really easy, again, at preschool age children, really easy to think about God as a super knowing being who sees things that humans can't, who hears things that humans can't, who knows things that humans don't know. That's actually, they kind of seem to get that before they've figured out exactly when their mother or other humans don't see things, right? So their error, I mentioned errors, or sometimes they're informative. Their errors, even for their mom, are in the direction of over attributing knowledge and perception to their mom. And so they treat mom as more godlike, and then they sort of figure out, no. Okay. As they get older, they sort of ratchet that back. They don't have to ratchet anything back for God. So in some ways that makes God, the jargon is a developmental primitive. God is more like what they kind of expect. So thinking about God as a super powerful being who is somehow involved with designing the natural world, really easy for kids, it turns out. And there are lots of other studies that sort of nudge in this direction, but that's the basic strategy. There are also just these fun little studies that do things like ask children, what they think about God in various places, including in largely atheistic cultural settings. And it's remarkable many times, those more qualitative kinds of studies, it's remarkable how often kids, even in largely atheistic families and cultures, still seem to have ideas about God. Many times, not 100% of the time. But it's that kind of research that all converges, I think, on this view that we've got a natural receptivity to something like God. And that is mirrored in both, as the podcaster, or whoever he was, Muhammad there, it's reflected in Muslim theology, but it's also reflected in Christian theology. That somehow we've got.
You said you wouldn't use the specific word. Which was it that you wouldn't
it said
use?
innate. Innate is a word I avoid using. I get accused of using the word innate, but I don't use it. If you read my stuff carefully, my books, I don't use the word innate because I think it's an ambiguous term that people, nobody knows what it means, so it isn't a useful word. I think we know what it means. Oh yeah, I know what innate means. Like, okay, what does innate mean? Well, present at birth. What about teeth? Not all babies are born with teeth. Oh yeah, but they're going to get teeth. Well, sure, they're going to have puberty at some point too. Is puberty innate? So what you're trying to get at is not innate, present at birth, because not everything's present at birth that sort of comes naturally, but that
the potential of it it's present at birth, maybe?
Maybe the potential is there. So some developmental scientists like Mike Tomasello and also my colleague Robert Macaulay, have used terms that are closer to naturalness, that there's this maturational naturalness or this maturationally expected kinds of outcomes. And what they mean by that is we expect by virtue of being a human being, the kind of animal we are, if we're talking about humans, the kind of animal we are, living in typical human environments, you will expect to see certain kinds of traits emerge in a very predictable kind of way by virtue of just maturing. So we expect babies to grow teeth. We expect them to learn how to walk. We expect them to learn how to talk. We expect them psychologically to think certain things at certain times in their life. And it turns out then that thinking in a way that makes them receptive to God looks to be one of those maturational kinds of things, among others. So that doesn't mean it's absolutely inevitable, because there are exceptional human environments, but and exceptional kids in various ways. But I sometimes compare it to. I hope this isn't scandalous for some people. It shouldn't be, but I compare it to dancing a lot. So those who have been around kids know that if you put like music on, especially if it's got a decent beat, around even little toddlers who are just learning how to walk, they'll start moving to the beat, and they will sometimes start spontaneously dancing. And it's because I think we've got lots of natural propensities that make us really receptive to synchronized movement, for lots of reasons that would be its own podcast episode. To synchronize movement, to imitating other people doing that kind of thing. We want to move with them, in synchrony with them. We're one of the only animals that actually moves in synchrony with others almost automatically. It's sometimes hard to resist. A crowd starts clapping. It's actually hard to clap offbeat. You have to really focus and like, okay, clap when they're not clapping. It's hard to do. And it's there from babyhood, from toddling around. It's right there. And that's the structure that then dance is built on. But that doesn't mean everybody is going to grow up to be a dancer.
No.
But that doesn't mean the natural structure was.
I'm kidding.
No, everybody should dance. It's just.
Yeah, and the privacy or their own. I'm kidding. We can all have fun.
Yeah, it's just it hasn't been cultivated. In some ways, it's not quite like language. Language is a little stronger, more sort of maturational, I think, but it is a little bit like language too, that the natural building blocks seem to be part of what it means to be a human being, but you still have to be in a human social environment that uses language to trigger or activate that potential, that maturationally natural potential for language still has to be cultivated. And we've got maturationally natural propensity towards dancing. It still needs to be cultivated in a cultural environment. We've got maturationally natural propensity toward believing in at least one God. And that still needs to be cultivated. It needs to be worked out. So that's my basic story. I'm glad he got it largely right. At least he was close enough for that kind of a format. I hope you are correct that Jordan Peterson has now read up on it and he is well versed in this. Maybe someday.
Yeah, I'm waiting for your future participation in the Jordan Peterson podcast. I'm sure that's going to happen really soon. Let's put it out there.
Any day now. It would be fun to talk to him.
It would be so cool. And for the people who want to learn more about this, they can check out your book, Born Believers.
Born Believers.
You talk about all of that and more in that book, Born Believers by Justin L. Barrett. Anyways,
thanks for the plug.
To show you that.
Yeah, that's fun.
We can get into today's topic, which is resolutions for a more integrated life this new year. Do you even do resolutions?
Sort of. Sometimes.
Okay. Expand your answer. Develop your
Well,
answer.
so in my household, one of the things that we do that's a little bit strange, a little countercultural, but I recommend it, is we on Christmas Day,
Yes.
we give presents to Jesus because it's his birthday.
Yes.
And for some
You
reason,
can read
it's
more about this in Saving Christmas. I'm going to just plug all your books.
well, thank you. Yes, you can read about this in Saving Christmas that you can get as an ebook, or you can, I guess, print it out too from Amazon. Um,
Yes.
which is our little story of how in my how we've developed our own little ways of celebrating Christmas that in some ways are trying to resolve the what do we do with Santa Claus and how do we keep Christmas about Jesus. But one of the things we've done is on Jesus's birthday, it's customary to give presents on people's birthdays. So we thought we should give Jesus presents on his birthday. And those presents can take lots of different forms. Sometimes they are an artistic product or a musical performance or a piece of poetry or writing. But often they're some kind of a commitment that in the upcoming year or in the upcoming months or whatever it is, I'm going to do X for Jesus. I'm going to do something for Jesus. So that's as close as we get to New Year's resolutions. But I'm glad you bring that up because you made me expand, because that's actually the first piece of advice I would give about resolutions is if you want them to stick, they've got to, it helps if they've got bigger meaning above and beyond just self-improvement. The jargon in psychology is it's best when they're sanctified. They're sanctified in some way, or they fit into a bigger meaning making system. It's easier to stick to it if you're doing it for Jesus as a gift of gratitude to him for what he's done for us, than if you're just like, you know what, I want to be a better person, so I'm going to do such and such. It's like, no,
Yeah.
maybe I am going to be a better person, but why? Why is that? Because it's either an expression of gratitude or it enables me to do something in God's kingdom on earth that otherwise I wouldn't be able to do. Now it has more meaning. That's going to help me stick to it when I get distracted by the rest of life. So that's how I do things that are approaching resolutions. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. And I do agree that we need to go beyond, oh, I want to be better this year. Yeah, having that deeper meaning helps us stick with them and also pick ourselves up when we inevitably fail. Inevitably fail? Is that a word?
Yeah. It's just not
Because
fair that you're better in English than most native English speakers. I guess you're nearly native.
oh, you're
You
too
learned it
kind.
early.
No, no.
Yeah, I mean, inevitably. Come on, how many people just use that? I mean, that's a lot of syllables.
That is a lot of syllables. That is true. I think you have a YouTube video about resolutions, so people can check that out on your channel. But
Sure.
maybe besides this deeper meaning, higher significance, do you have any quick tips on like general things we should keep in mind when trying to develop good resolutions?
Yeah, just two more quick things in that.
Yeah.
One is use the power of the pack for sure.
Oh,
As they say, use the power of the pack. If you can do it with other people, if you can,
yeah.
especially two other people, usually one other person isn't enough because that person might flake out on you and then you're on your own. But if you've got two of them, there's more mutual accountability. And so it's not just an accountability partner, as churchy people like to say. It's we're in this together. We're doing something together. That can really help if you can. I mean, it's not strictly necessary, but it sure helps stick through it because you don't want to
You
let
can
each
get
other down.
creative with that. Actually, I do something that a lot of people find really weird when I first talk about it, but
Uh-huh.
then they kind of get it. And it's, for example, I'm working on a writing project that I need to move forward on every day, and it's challenging. But I decided to recruit some friends and tell them, like, okay, every day we're gonna wake up before 6 a.m. and we're gonna just log onto this video chat thingy, and we're just gonna be together doing the thing we want to accomplish that morning. In my case, it's writing, but for some of them, it's reading or doing their devotional or whatever. And we don't talk. We just log in, turn on the camera, and then each of us does their thing. And it's been really impactful for many of them because it's just being, I guess, as I said, the power of the pack. We're just there with each other. We don't talk about how well or how bad we did that day. We just show up for each other. And that is really encouraging.
Oh, good. Thanks for that. That's a good concrete example of how to make this work.
Yeah. So you said two things.
Two
Power of the
things.
pack and
the other thing is to be very specific, both in terms of what it is you're doing and what would be outcomes. And I think it's especially true for those of us who are sciencey type people. One of the things that at least some researchers have started suggesting when they look at what's the personality kind of profile of sciencey people is we tend to be very achievement oriented. And we like to know when we've accomplished a task, or when we like to see progress at least. Yes. In some way. So being very specific, so you're right. I say a lot more about this in one of my videos, but for instance, instead of saying, I want to get healthier this year, I'm going to eat healthier, well, no, you got to specify, what does that mean for you? What does healthy eating look like? And what would be indicators of success?
Yeah.
And be able to really specify, it means that I'm going to, eat more vegetables. And what does that mean? Eat more vegetables. Well, I will make sure that I have at least one vegetable side dish every day. Every day? Okay. And then you want to make it realistic. I will aim for every day, but it's good enough if it's 5 out of 7 days. Okay. All right. There you go. Something very specific. Or another way to go is, or you've got very clear outcomes that you're aiming for. And this is why a lot of people do have successes when they have specific goals. Like, I'm going to finish a 5K this year, or I'm going to lose 5 pounds, or whatever it is, that it's a reasonable, specific goal. So I think that specificity, using the power of the pack, and then giving it greater meaning or sanctification, those are at least 3 of the ingredients of that'll maximize your chances of having a successful resolution.
Yeah, I think that is really helpful. I try to help people think about this in like 3 levels. First, we have like this broad direction towards, I want to walk to, like, I want to be healthier. That is like sort of where you're aiming to go towards, but how do you know you're moving forward? And you have to set out goals. Like you said, I'm gonna have the goal of every week having a side dish of vegetables 3 times a week or 5 times a week. And then we can even break it down forward and creating tiny habits that lead you to that goal. For example, like every Sunday, I'm gonna do some vegetable meal prep. So I'm gonna cut up some veggies for the week. And that habit helps you get into the goal of eating more vegetables, which will get you to the path of being more healthy. So Brilliant. That's a way you can think about it.
Wonderfully said. That's exactly right. That's right. Good stuff. See, you're the expert on this. I don't know why you're asking me.
I love habits. It's one of my obsessions. I can get a little too obsessed with them, though.
But that really is the way that habits are the way we make big behavioral change over time. Is you have to establish new habits. So no, I think that was fantastic. And you're right. It's taking goals and then breaking them down into action steps that are going to facilitate those goals that help us get there. So no, that was a wonderful example.
So now we have a better idea of what we mean by resolutions and things we have to keep in mind to create good resolutions, because we so often just said like, oh, I'm going to read more this year or whatever. And that usually doesn't work. But now that we know that we need to be more specific and work with people so we stick to these resolutions, we can start thinking about resolutions that are more specifically related to the integrated life. That is the thing we talk about here. So maybe before we get into that, we can give people a quick reminder of what it means to be a more integrated person. What is the direction we are aiming, walking towards?
Right. So, at least in this podcast and my channel more generally, when I'm talking about what it means to be an integrated person, usually what I have in mind is um, I'm mostly talking to those of us who are, I say, sciencey people.
Yes.
And that doesn't necessarily mean you are a scientist. It may be that you are just enthusiastic about the sciences, or at least some of the sciences. You use the sciences in your work. Maybe you are a research scientist, or maybe you used to be a research scientist, or maybe you're a pastor or a theologian, but you recognize that the sciences have important tools for us and they're important culture shapers. And so you've got that kind of sympathy toward the sciences. So that's what I mean by sciencey people. It's basically positively inclined toward the sciences and scientific technologies and so forth. And then to be an integrated person is to that part of your life, that attraction to the sciences, is brought into and worked in appropriately to the rest of your life, especially as a Christ follower. What does it mean to be a Christian, a disciple of Jesus, and a sciencey person at the same time? How does that scienciness infuse and help color your expression of your Christian life? But likewise, how does your Christian life help shape, inform, and maybe change the way you approach and think about the sciences, especially if you are a scientist or working in a sciencey field? How does your Christian faith inform? How does it motivate? How does it change how you do the sciences, if it does? But to be more thoughtful about that so that you don't have to say, well, I'm a Christian on Sundays and I'm a scientist, the other 6 days of the week, or something weird like that, and be a disintegrated person. We want you to be a whole person, an integrated person. So that's what we're talking about.
Yes, we love it. So how can we resolve to be more integrated this year? And I know that it's going to look different for different people, because maybe some people are more attuned with their sciencey side and are really into understanding the science, and they walk in a way that science is at the forefront of their lives, and they have a good grasp on it, but maybe are lacking in the theology, philosophy side of things, or maybe the other way around. So things are going to look different for different people, but maybe we can think about a couple of ways people can think about becoming more integrated this new year.
Great. That's a good way to frame it, because you're right. A lot depends on you, who you are. So a good place to start is just to think about, this isn't a resolution. This is sort of pre-work for the resolution, is to figure out, okay, what kind of person are you? To be an integrated person, you need some tools, integrated in this sense, right? You need to have some biblical literacy, right? You need to know your Bible. You need to have some theological literacy. You need to know what are the basics of Christian theology as have been revealed through the Bible and interpreted through our traditions, through reason and so forth. You need to understand something about what the sciences are.
Yes.
Right. And maybe have some depth in one or more particular sciences. Who knows? Okay. So it's hard to integrate things you don't have. It's a little bit like if you're going to bake bread and you need to integrate, we'll use a very biblical image, yeast into the dough. You're going to integrate it in. Well, it's easier to do that if you have yeast. If you don't have any yeast, there's not much integration to be done. Or if you only have a little tiny bit of yeast and you need a lot more than that because the batch of dough that you've got, you might need to grow your yeast first, or you might need to get more yeast. Or if you don't have any flour, but you've got a ton of yeast, well, there's not a lot of integrating to be done there either, right? So you need the ingredients before you can integrate really well. And but I do think you do this as you go. So breaking away from the bread baking metaphor, we can learn as we go. We can integrate as we're building up our expertise as well. So I think first step, evaluate. Where's your weak spot? What are you missing? And sometimes that's hard to see at first. So give yourself grace on that too. Just sort of give it your best guess. Where's that? What's lacking in maybe three different spaces you might think about? There are probably more, but I can at least think of three. One is what you know. So whether that's, your sort of biblical knowledge, theological knowledge, maybe how you understand the sciences, which could be philosophy of science, or it could be your expertise in scientific areas. So that's sort of the intellectual clump. Then there's kind of the relational clump. What are your relationships like? You might think, well, what's that got to do with it? Well, you're not a scientist by yourself. You're not a sciencey person by yourself. You're not a pastor by yourself. You're doing it in community with other people. And you being integrated is going to benefit other people in your community, and it's going to be benefited by other people in your community if you've got good relationships. And besides, we're called to love God and love others. That's kind of the core of the Christian life. It's not just about thinking things right. We love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, right? Mind is just a piece of that. The rest of it is a big part of that is relationships. Love God and love others. So what are our relationships like? That we need to think about that. Where are the gaps there? And I can come back to some very specific ways to evaluate that. But first, the three buckets, the sort of what I know, who I'm relating to, my relationships, and then what's my character? What's the quality of my life and who I am? And am I growing as an individual? Am I starting to bear fruit of the Spirit more and more? How would I evaluate myself on the ninefold fruit of the Spirit? Am I a patient person? Am I a loving person? Am I kind? Am I gentle? Am I self-controlled? And so forth. What is that? Can I be honest about that? So the first thing, and I think it's a great thing to do somewhere around Christmas time leading up into the new year, is to really do a little bit of self-examination on those three fronts, and they do interact with each other. How? Again, each of these could be their own podcast episode all by themselves or their own topic. But it turns out that at places, so let's just take that last one, am I a person who shows fruit of the Spirit? Well, look up the fruit of the Spirit in the Bible. You've got your nine different sort of elements. Some of those, not all of those, there are actually measures that have been developed by psychological scientists. Now, are they perfect? No. Do they map exactly onto whatever our biblical view of the fruit of the Spirit is? Maybe not, but they're at least an index that gets us in the right neighborhood. And so you can go to places like Science for the Greater Good, which is a website that curates a lot of stuff that is meant to be science that makes a difference in people's lives. And you can find some of those measures in places like that and little essays and articles. You could take these little inventories, take a little patience measure. How you doing on patience?
Ooh, that'll be fun to do for a podcast episode.
A self-control measure. How do you do on self-control? And other things in that space like gratitude. How do I do on gratitude? How hopeful am I? Am I a hopeful or optimistic type of person? You can measure yourself on those types of things to do a check-in. And then you can, in that process, then identify, well, where are those spaces that then maybe I need a little more attention in my life in the upcoming year, that I need to invest in, that I need to prayerfully sort of bring these to God and say, I'd like to bear more of this spiritual fruit in my life. What can I do, in that direction? Some of scientists have been developing interventions that at least allegedly help cultivate these. You might say, wait a minute, I thought they were from the Holy Spirit. It's fruit of the Spirit after all. Yes, but sometimes we have to prepare the field to receive the fruit properly, right? Yeah. We need to till the ground if we keep using these agricultural metaphors. We got to fertilize the tree. And these interventions help you do that. They help you water the tree. Yeah. Or whatever metaphor you like there. And the nice thing is, if you do these measures on yourself at the beginning of the year, you can do them a year later and see, did I progress? Did it work? Do I need a new strategy for the upcoming year if it didn't work as well as I hoped? So that you can really kind of hold yourself to those things. So that's on that kind of what's my character like. Um, I made that I anchored it specifically to, fruit of the spirit, but you can also think about things like, am I generally taking care of myself in terms of my body as well? As a temple of God, am I taking care of my body? Because if I'm not doing that, that's probably could weaken my ability to bear fruit of the spirit. It could weaken my relationships. It could weaken my ability to think well as well. So there are lots of things there. Am I getting enough time outside? That's one of those specific kinds of things that lots of people really ought to think about in our increasingly urban world. Am I getting away from urban noise and digital media like this and getting outside and just enjoying creation and a little bit of natural sound and air? Research seems to suggest it improves our creativity as well as our mood and helps us deal with anxiety and lots of things. So get outside, get a little exercise. It's good for you. But that's in that sort of personal kind of bucket still, my character. I'll pause before I jump in. Anything I say there's that you wanted to elaborate on? Or
No, I think that is a great place to start. Maybe people, I think for the exercise one, probably not, but for the character, fruit of the spirit ones, people might have a little trouble trying to find goals and habits that they can work on in the new year to actually develop those character traits. But I think that your suggestion of looking for the interventions that have been developed and coming up with a plan of actually going through them, that is a great resolution for the new year. So it might sound a little weird if you've never thought about it, but it makes a lot of sense of trying to create habits that promote your character flourishing. And maybe it is something related to being grateful and creating a habit of every day I'm going to write however many things I'm grateful for. And these are things that have been measured to help us grow in gratitude. So we might have to get a little creative and go think about outside the box or do things that we've never done and feel silly doing. But I think that's going to be helpful for us to grow in character this new year, for sure.
good, thanks. Yeah, that's right. It's not the normal way of thinking about these things for sure. But it's
we feel like this is something that has to come out naturally out of us, but the Bible is very clear about disciplining ourselves for holiness. In Spanish, disciplínate para la piedad is something that we need to work towards, not just expect to happen.
Yeah, and there's some really easy examples of this. So one aspect of the fruit of the spirit is self-control. And there is now abundant research around, well, when do we have self-control and when do we not have so much self-control? And what are specific things we can do, like get enough sleep, which is a hard one for a lot of people increasingly. But if you're sleep deprived, it's hard to be self-controlled. If you're drunk, it's hard to be self-controlled. I mean, there's just some really simple things. We know that as a biological sort of being, as an animal, if we're not taking care of the right things biologically, it makes it hard to bear this spiritual fruit. And that means that's the negative side. The positive side is if we then engage in behaviors or put ourselves in situations that maximize our ability for self-control, we can actually cultivate it better. I mean, and that's not just with self-control. You can spin that out for lots of different ones. So it's not so kooky if you really stop and think about ourselves as whole beings, that we can take action steps. If we didn't, we'll put it this way. I mean, for those who might think, wait a minute, but this is the work of the Holy Spirit. We don't do anything. You are pointing out biblical evidence. No. We're called to certain kinds of activities, but also if you really believe that, you would do nothing. Right? None of our churches really believe that, or they wouldn't bother with any kinds of discipleship, any kind of spiritual cultivation activities. They wouldn't bother because, oh, God just does it to us no matter what I do. It's like, no, he's gracious to us. He gives us free will to reject this growth of spiritual fruit in our lives, to to do things that are going to discourage that. So it's not
Yeah, I'd like to
crazy if you
compare
stop
it
and think.
to physical bodily growth. You don't have to make an effort to grow from a baby to a child and from a child to an adolescent. You're programmed to grow, but at the same time, if you don't do certain things, if you don't eat well, if you don't sleep well, if you don't move well, if you don't hydrate yourself well, you're gonna stunt that growth sometimes very severely. So yeah, in a way, the Spirit is moving in us and causing us to grow, because God has given us life and He moves in us and makes us grow. But at the same time, we practice, we discipline ourselves, and we walk in a way that promotes that growth.
That's a
And
great
makes it better
metaphor.
than it can be.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thanks.
So character, and then we
Character.
have relationships.
Our relationships, a really helpful little exercise is to figure out, well, what does your relational network look like? And again, I think I've got a video on this somewhere on the channel. But that and I've drawn a lot by the work of Robin Dunbar and his colleagues on social networks. This was before digital media stuff, but he was getting to the idea that
Actual social networks.
actual real interpersonal social network, an observation he's made using, he and others have made looking at humans, but also other social animals, is that we tend to have rings of intimacy, these sort of nested layers of intimacy in our social networks. Human social networks average, by some measures, around 150 people that you have genuine personal relationships with. And within that 150, there's sort of about a 50-person ring of sort of intimacy, and then this more like 25-ish, and or sorry, no, 5, 15, 50 are sort of inner rings. So you've got your 5 best, most trusted people that you would give a kidney to, plus or minus 1 or 2 people, and then your 15 people who high degree of trust, you can really count on them. You can share lots of secrets. You would willingly share money, resources, and stuff without worries of you would even pay attention to it, maybe. And then 50, these are still very close friends. And then 150, these are personal relationships, but not necessarily quite as close. Those are the averages. But one of the things I've noticed in me when I've periodically actually tried to list, all right, who are my roughly 5 people? Who are my roughly 15 people, my 50 people in my network? And that's probably enough of an exercise, is to try to do those rings. I might discover that my network is out of shape, in the sense that I might not have enough people in my inner rings. I have plenty of people. Maybe I really feel comfortable that, oh yeah, I've got at least 150 good personal relationships, but maybe I've only got 3 people in my inner ring, that really tight ring, and I've only got about 8 in the next ring. Or in doing this exercise and list their names, I might discover that while I've got 5 people that I really feel like, yeah, these are my, high trust, high commitment kinds of relationships, that I haven't been investing in them very much. I've been taking them for granted, even though they're my best besties. And maybe that's something I need to pay attention to in the upcoming year. So that's one of the exercises I like to do periodically is, all right, who are those people? And you can ask yourself questions like, who are people that if I saw them in a restaurant, in a coffee shop, a cafe, wherever it is, it wouldn't be awkward at all for me to just walk up to them and say, hey, can I sit down and talk to you? And they would welcome it, and you wouldn't feel awkward. It wouldn't violate any social norms. It'd be perfectly okay. In fact, you might even say, hey, could you buy me a cup of coffee? and it would be all right. I think hopefully we all have those people in our lives where they go, oh, sure, of course, sit down. Or I've got something important going on in my life. I really need to talk to somebody. And they're like, absolutely, I'll drop everything. Who are those people for you? And who are you for other people in that regard? That's a really good exercise to work through because it can help us identify, are we loving others well? Are we being loved enough too? And maybe we need more investment in that area. So that's another kind of thing to look at before we even get to the, okay, now what am I doing to develop my mind in terms of integration? Because I need to be a Christ follower who's loving God and loving others well. I need to be developing, cultivating fruit of the Spirit well for my intellectual integration to actually be powerful in the world and powerful in my own life. You can get all the answers right, but if you're not getting your relationships right and you're not getting your character right, nobody cares if you're getting your answers right. You're not a person who's going to have impact, and you're missing out on being the best version of yourself and the abundant life that Christ has called us to.
Yeah. And for the relationship side of things, also, it can get weird for some people to make it into habits. But I think it's really helpful to have a habit of every week, I'm going to call my 5 people just to check out on them, or I'm going to make sure I text them at least to make sure they're okay, or to reach out in some way. I'm going to grab a cup of coffee every month with whomever. I'm going to put myself, even if I feel that I don't have enough relationships, well, I'm going to make a habit to put myself out there. I'm going to participate in one church activity every month, or one university activity every month that I wouldn't usually go to, because I understand that I need this relationship. So again, making it something very actionable that can get you to that place of developing strong relationships is a really good thing to practice.
Yeah, and not easy. And
Not
those
easy.
of us who love the sort of activities of mind, often we pull ourselves away from that. And we need it too. As attractive as lighthouse living might be and the hermitage, no, we need people. We were created for relationships.
People who need people are the luckiest people in the world, as Barbara Streisand would say.
Wow, did not see that coming.
Okay, now for the knowledge part.
So what about the knowledge part? What are some things we can do? Well, as suggested at the beginning, again, start with a fair kind of assessment of what do you have? Do you have enough stuff? Do you have enough ingredients to integrate? What does that mean? Biblical literacy, theological literacy, understanding of sciences, which can be content, but also it can be sort of philosophical issues of what makes sciences. And so one thing you might do is just a practical exercise to lay bare that. It's answer the question, how does your faith inform? How does your faith fuel or energize your work as a scientist, if you're a scientist or a sciencey person? Or if you're maybe you're not active professionally in the sciences, but you're a science sort of enthusiast who's working in other spaces, might say, how does my faith and my science work together in my life? Are they connected to each other in some way? And I made it a how question because I want you to write a paragraph describing that relationship. Assess, how do you think about these things? Does it matter at all? What does it look like? So that then a year from now, you can do the same exercise again and see how's your answer changed, if anything. And by answering it the first time, it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel awkward. And you might feel like, I just don't even know how to say this. And that's revealing. And it may be, again, for those different reasons, maybe you're missing an ingredient. And so that's something to consider. Which ingredient are you missing? And can you then improve your understanding? So can you define what science is? Can you identify what are the features of a science? Write it down. Again, that's this kind of thing you can check next year. And it might be that actually you find it really easy. If you do, there's probably something wrong. If you find it really, really hard, it's probably right. If it's too easy, there's probably something wrong. It should be moderately hard because at least most people who have thought long and hard about what constitutes a science, they don't find this easy. They end up finding that that's actually tricky. And so one of the things you might do to make it a little bit easier, but also recognize where you might not getting it right, is to find to do a little bit of reading in sort of accessible philosophy of science kind of stuff. One of the books that I found really helpful is this little one here by Paul Dicken, who is a philosopher of science, Getting Science Wrong. And the subtitle there is Why the Philosophy of Science Matters. I've heard scientists say things like, scientists need a philosopher of science like birds need an ornithologist. And their point they're trying to make is that birds don't need ornithologists to be good birds, and scientists don't need philosophers of science to be good scientists. Well, to a certain extent, that's true. But if you're trying to do something interesting and different with the sciences that other people aren't doing, like integrated into your life, maybe it's useful. Just like birds occasionally, like when they're going extinct, an ornithologist might be actually really useful to them. So it's a helpful little book that helps us think through what are sciences, and maybe I've got too much of a grade school view of what a science is. And so I don't have enough sophistication or nuance in my understanding to realize that actually getting this right can matter, especially if I'm going to do integration. On the more Christian-y end of things, I found this book by Alvin Plantinga really helpful, Where the Conflict Really Lies, Science, Religion, and Naturalism. Alvin Plantinga is a famous Christian and philosopher. In this book, you end up getting a little bit of philosophy of science here and there, including a really nice articulation of how it is that the Christian faith has certain kinds of assumptions in our theology that actually resonate with what it means to do science, do scientific activities. Do I agree with everything in his book? No. Are there some things where I think, of course, because I'm a nerd and we're going to be like that, but still it's a really helpful kind of book for thinking about that. So if getting philosophy of science right, and those are a couple of places to go that you might think about adding to your reading, and see if a year from now you can define what the sciences are a little bit better, if that's a more comfortable exercise. We're also going to try here at Blueprint 1543 to roll out a reading program for sciencey people to improve our biblical literacy. So this is something that I've been doing this, in 2024. Is one of the things I put forth for myself was I wanted to get to know the Bible better and have just a better handle on it, because I have found that as a scientist and a Christ follower, my colleagues in the sciences often want me to address biblical issues. Really, they have questions about the Bible and what the Bible teaches. And for me to be a good resource to them and just more confident in my knowledge, it was good for me to start thinking, like, okay, well, what would it look like for sciencey people like me to read the Bible? Not the usual approach that maybe people from the humanities or from a literary background might approach reading the Bible, but a sciencey person. So we're going to we are going to make available on the Blueprint website a reading plan for sciencey people, at least outline of that. That also has some resources for thinking about the kinds of science-related questions that arise when reading certain parts of the Bible. This is not going to be your typical kind of read your Bible. Here's a verse a day, or here's a chapter a day, or we're trying to get to the Bible in 1 year, because that's not the aim. The aim is to improve biblical literacy, an overall view of what's in the Bible, how do I make sense of it, especially as a scientific type of person. Because maybe biblical literacy is your thing. One of the things that I've been discovering is, wow, I thought I knew my Bible pretty well. I'm learning an awful lot, and it's kind of fun. So I can see progress. We'll try to find some way to mark progress in this reading plan too. I haven't got that entirely figured out, but we're working on it. So that's something for improving biblical literacy. that you might consider. And then there's just sort of general theological literacy. One of the things that I do try to do periodically is read some theology. It can be painful if you're not used to it. One of the clearest and most concise presenters of Christian theology is a former scientist and also one of the world's leading theologians, and his name is Alistair McGrath. Yep. Recently retired from Oxford University. He has some really nice short introductions to Christian theology. They come into various names and they've had various editions, so I'm not going to, but Alistair McGrath, look for his very short introductions to Christian theology. They're a little terse sometimes. It's not sort of warm and fuzzy reading. He just lays it out there for you, but that's helpful, right? If you want to get it pretty quickly. So if you've got biblical or theological kind of gaps, I should have said with the biblical stuff too, I'm a big fan of the Bible Project's work. And that'll definitely be part of the reading plan, is to put in watch some of those videos while you're reading. So, I think a great place to start is the book of Luke, but start by watching some of the Bible Project's videos on what's the New Testament, how to read biblical literature in the New Testament. Okay, what's the overview of the book of Luke? Now I'm going to read the book of Luke. That kind of a process, so that you're getting some scaffolding around it instead of just plowing through reading, that you're getting, you've got some other resources for supporting that. That'll also cultivate some theological understanding as well. And then finally, Ana loves this part because she likes books. We'll ask her how many books that she's going to have read in 2024 and whether she's going to keep resolving to read enormous numbers of books. But I mentioned, right, if your gap might be in the science side of things. And even if you're a professional scientist, you might have some gaps you're not aware of, because maybe you've been reading in one area of the sciences for a long time. And that gives you a very skewed view of what the sciences are. And it doesn't make you quite as flexible in your thinking about, well, what counts as a science? So I like to do things like periodically push myself to read things outside of my area. So, for instance, I've recently read a book on neuroaesthetics. What's that? It's the neuroscientific study of how people appreciate art and beauty. It was kind of a cool read.
Nice.
I read, A Briefer History of Time this year, just because, every once in a while you need to read, some physics and cosmology kind of stuff, because why not? I'm a cognitive scientist and psychological scientist, so that's way outside of my area. For those who are from, biological, chemical, and physical sciences, you might consider reading something in the human sciences, like neuroscience or cognitive science. Maybe stuff that's really practical, like, here's a fun book that Ana was going to steal from me at some point. Mindware, Tools for Smart Thinking by Richard Nisbett, who was a very influential social psychologist who has studied thinking as well. And gives lots of sort of just what's a scientist's view on just thinking well, and the research around thinking well, and the biases we have in forming good thoughts and problem solving and strategy. It's sort of practical to many people's lives every day, and you get exposure to a different approach, a different scientific area, a different approach for doing scientific work. So those are some things to consider doing as well, so that you've got all of your ingredients for integrating really well. And then finally, since we seem to be doing book plugs, I am hopeful that in 2025, we'll be rolling out at least one, if not two, books of mine on integration, where I've got one that is further down the runway, that's aimed at very early career people, think 17 to 20-year-olds who are considering going into the sciences. But I'm also working on a sort of the more advanced version for those who are either finishing undergrad and going into grad school, doctoral programs, or are beyond that goes a little bit deeper and is going to be a little more challenging in the right kinds of ways, where but they're both structured around 5 big questions to answer that we've talked about on this channel. How to think about, or at least some tools that I've found useful in thinking about how I'm bringing my understanding of the sciences, Christian theology, together in my life as a sciencey person. So those are some more resources that be looking for. Sorry,
Yeah, that's very
we ended up
exciting.
pitching a lot more than we like to. But
No, that's good. We have to give people options because, yeah, one of your resolutions could be to become more integrated, to get more ingredients in the sciencey side of things and the theological side of things. And maybe one of your goals can be go through one of these books or one of the courses. We also have the Theo Psych Academy and our resources page, a blueprint. You can go through one of those courses, or you can go through our Theopsych book that's already available, or through some of the other books Justin mentioned. And then you can make a habit of every week, I'm going to spend an hour reading these materials and jotting down notes or things like that. So, yeah, definitely lots of options for people who want to become more integrated this year. Thank you, Justin. And
thank
we're
you,
out
Ana.
of time. We're out of time. But I
Oh,
wanted to ask you before we leave for the year, any words you want to give our audience during this last few days of the year, any encouragement or anything you've been reflecting on and you want to share that with us today?
why is the first thing that jumps to mind is no, I don't want to be encouraging. No, maybe
You're delightful.
oh, I know I've got a problem. That's sin in my heart right there, or I don't know. I'm just sort of feeling sassy and snappy today. Um, I guess my encouragement is as much as we've sort of talked about, we've gone meta here about how to become integrated. It's it shouldn't be another project. It shouldn't be another something to check off my list, and it certainly shouldn't feel like some kind of a burden. The whole point of doing this podcast and all of the material on this channel is just want to help thinking about thinking and living in a more integrated way, because it's a more fulfilling life. It's good. It's fun. We should be playing into it, not just thinking about it. Um, so that being my encouragement is, if you feel like, wow, I'm not as integrated as I'd like to be, well, of course you're not. That's okay. We're here to help each other just progress in this so that we steadily, gradually just become more integrated, and we have richer, more abundant lives that are bearing more spiritual fruit, that we're loving God and loving others better as we go on. And we're not going to be perfect in it, but that's okay. This can be a joyful journey and not a slog. We're not here to punish or guilt or anything else like that. But it really is, it's kind of fun. It's really fun and life-giving to think about how God has given us these wonderful tools in the sciences to enrich our lives and to better serve his kingdom. And so he's invited many of us then to become better caretakers of those tools, better users of those tools, and to share them with others. And he's going to empower us to do that. So he's inviting us to, play the game, and it's going to be fun. So please join us, stick with us, and thanks for tuning in this year, and look forward to seeing you in the next year.
Well, thank you, Justin. We'll see you next year. Bye.
Bye.